Hey everyone! A while ago I posted a video about Swordtail, and towards the end of it I talked briefly about how the problems with this character are representative of the issues with the third arc as a whole. Today I want to go into more detail, not just on the third arc, but on why it might have been written this way and where I think Tui could head with her writing next. So as everyone has come to agree, the third arc of Wings of Fire was definitely subpar compared to the rest of the series, and even the rest of Tui's previous works. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I want to mention why I think it began to go south. The third arc had a lot of potential. She set up a very interesting premise, and it could have ended up being a solid addition to the series and an opening to future books, if she wanted any. However, the additions became less and less satisfying until the climax, with Book 15, which was one of the most disappointing payoffs ever. Why do I think this happened? Well, one of the most telling issues with the series is that we don't have a coherent plotline. Look back to Arcs 1 and 2. We know who the villain is from the get-go. In Arc 1, the villain was the concept of the war, with Scarlet as a player as well. Although it takes 3 books to get to the Nightwings, we still know what the problem is, and we know what the characters are working towards. In Arc 2, we hear Darkstalker's voice in Book 6, and again, by the 3rd book, we know who the villain is. There is a cohesive narrative. Unfortunately, the 3rd arc doesn't feel like an arc. It doesn't feel like one story told over 5 books. It feels like 5 books, with vague connections. Who is the main villain of the series? Is it the Hivewings, Wasp, the Hivemind, some wimpy dude and his tortured dead dragonette? Because we don't know who the villain is, it's impossible to understand what the goal is. Books 11 and 12 set up a pretty solid beginning. One tribe oppressed and one tribe wiped out. The Hivewings are the enemy. It's pretty cut and dry. Now, I'm not saying you can't have suspense and plot twist as to the identity of the villain. As a writer, I love me some good plot twists. But it's a good rule of thumb not to wait until the final book to do so. If we'd had 2 or 3 books to develop Cottonmouth as a character, he would have had more weight, and it would have been actually intimidating. Instead, it's like, wait, there's a random dead guy, and he's scary? Where is Queen Wasp right now? Hemlock? Hello? So that's one of the first problems. We don't know who the villain is, so we don't know the trajectory of the series. Another issue that contributes to this, and stems from it, is the incoherency of the plot itself. Like I said, these seem like 5 unconnected stories. Books 11 and 12 kind of play off each other. They both have the same villain, the same basic goal, the same setting, etc. Book 13 is a stretch. It could have played into the other 2, but 13 is the beginning of that subpar writing where everything just gets really confusing. It's a completely different setting, a completely new character set, and suddenly, a completely different goal. We get introduced to Hemlock and Hivemind. I could have lived with this. It's an odd choice, but with work, the next 2 books could have reeled it back in and saved it. Book 14 just completely dropped the ball. Now, I liked Book 14. I thought it was an interesting, if somewhat slow, read. But it just doesn't fit into a series. This reads like a collection of winglets. Now we're in another continent with a dragon we've seen like once? 7 books ago? It just killed the momentum of the plot. Instead of this high-stakes mass exodus, we had this slow, dragging-on book full of boring things like logistics and negotiations. No spying, no fighting, no big discoveries, no big issues. Nothing to keep people interested. And then, Book 15 tries to paint itself as an action book, but it no longer has any momentum behind it. Nothing to bring readers in already feeling the pressure. Like, sure, some dragons are captured, but there wasn't enough emotion with that. It was hastily done and shoddily followed. Book 15 was a mess. Luna's characterization was a disaster, from a stubborn dragon who wouldn't be bullied in Book 11, to a hopeful mess who just wants everything to turn out okay? What? There were too many dragons to follow, the book moved too fast and too slow at the same time. It was like a paint-by-number. Everything led to the plot, and there were no character pieces, no plot deviations, nothing to spice it up. It was the equivalent of a plain bowl of noodles. Sure, it's food, but without spices, sauce, meat, and vegetables, it's not particularly tasty or healthy. In the same way, a plain story needs engaging characters with their own goals, a plot that is realistic enough not to just fall into place, and of course, a villain who we're actually scared of. Heading back to villains for a moment, I'll explain exactly why Cottonmouth didn't work. Tui told us he was scary, but we never saw him do anything except in a flashback that was like 1,000,000 years ago. Wasp was scary. We saw her do horrible things. She was weird and creepy and stabbed little baby hivewing eggs. Everyone was afraid of her. She oppressed the Silkwings. She allowed things like Misbehavior's Way, and we were always worried she'd catch and execute our main characters. And sure, you could swoop in and say, but it was all Cottonmouth. And while that might be true, we have to see it. We would have needed hints the entire time it was him, and then heavy proof of it. And he would still have needed to make his own mark as a villain. If we don't see Cottonmouth himself doing villainous things, he's just a cheap plot twist with nothing to back him up. Now, don't think I'm blaming Tui for this. I got mad respect for that woman. I wouldn't have lasted this long writing the same thing for 10 years. I would get it if she's out of ideas or simply bored and ready to try something else. It happens. I've been doing YouTube for, 3 years maybe? I'm already feeling the itch to move on and try something new. I have to keep coming up with different ideas or I'll stagnate. I'm honestly surprised she went for a third arc at all. I think book 10 would have been a perfect cap for the series. It tied a lot of things up, it was very well written, and it's widely popular. Sometimes with these types of big franchises, less is more. Although we all want more of the characters we know and love, it can be like junk food. You have to know when to stop. It doesn't mean you can't still love them, but everything has to end. Books are like superheroes. They either die a hero or they live long enough to become the villain. Which is to say, they end on a good note like book 10, or they flounder along and end sourly like book 15. Now, I don't know Tui. Maybe she still loves writing Wings of Fire. Maybe she just didn't put in the effort to make Arc 3 amazing. But I've read her work, from Wings of Fire to Warriors to the Menagerie trilogy, and I know she's a good author. And Arc 3 just isn't on her level. The only thing I can imagine that explains that difference is a lack of passion for the project. Arc 3 is all over the place, with weird pacing and weirder characters. It takes 3 or 4 books to even know who the villain is. Book 14 was like a glorified intermission. Very few, if any, of the characters were engaging or easy to get behind. The entire series jumped around too much to have any kind of unified plot. Was it about scavengers? Was it about the power play between Hivewings and Silkwings? Was it about finding the lost continent and starting some kind of relationship with it? Was it about ancient history? Nobody knows because the books couldn't pick a focus. And while I do think we got some good from it, overall, I just don't think it's a good end for the series. By contrast, think about Book 10. It's massive, with a gripping plot and compelling characters. The stakes are real, and have been developed over several books. By the time we get to Book 10, we're on the edge of our seat wondering what happens. This story ties up with losses and successes, which is important. Your victory is meaningless if nothing was sacrificed to get to it. And no, sacrificing a dead dragonette who we just met doesn't count. And the epilogue of Book 10 closes everyone's stories, bringing satisfaction no matter who you liked. Book 15 was the most anticlimactic story I've ever read. It was slow, hard to get through, and barely anything happened. It didn't really have much to do with the previous arcs either, and Book 10 was a good closing point for both the first and second arcs. Now, if you genuinely like the third arc, or one of the books or characters, I'm happy for you. I'm always glad when people can enjoy things, and I generally try to stay positive with my videos. I've enjoyed parts of it too. I'm not saying it's a total loss, it's just got writing problems that make it hard to enjoy reading. However, this has been on my mind for a while, and I can't help wanting to talk about it. If Tui really is feeling creative burnout for Wings of Fire, I personally completely get that, and I've been struggling with it myself lately as well. Arc 3 did have massive potential. I really think books 11 and 12, though a little weak, could have built into something wonderful. If the series had focused on the culture of Hivewings oppressing Silkwings, and left out everything about scavengers, ancient history, and the other mind, I think it could have been a really interesting addition to the series. Not to mention the messages you can send with books like that. With a fantasy world like Matala, you're free to make points about oppression, how we treat others, and the fact that history is narrated by the winning side. Instead, the third arc just left everyone feeling annoyed and unsatisfied. Well, what do you guys think? I don't mean to come down hard on this arc, even though I kinda do. I love Tui's work. In fact, I'm working on rereading the Menagerie right now. It's a great trilogy she wrote. Check it out if you haven't already. Many of the issues with these books are unavoidable, but in the end, I have a lot of sympathy for Tui because as a writer, I can understand why she might be ready to move on. And hey, writing is tough. It takes a lot of gumption. Did you guys enjoy the third arc? Or are you disappointed in it as well? Do you think Tui is ready to move on? What other directions might she take with her writing? Do you think she ought to write anything else within the Wings of Fire universe? Be sure to check out the links in the description if you want to support me or find more of my art. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and please have a wonderful week.